Frontline Gaming presents 40K Stat Center with your host, Val Heffelfinger and the Falcon.
In the first action we've seen since COVID-19, we take off like a Crockett to cover the Nope, not gonna do that. But while the rest of us were self-isolating, two defiant pairing platforms decided to get a whole lot closer than 6 feet. We take the masks off of the BCP, down under pairings, pairing. This is Chat Center. Why, hidey-ho, folks. It's really, really nice to get to do that silly intro over that hilarious and ridiculous intro music. I hope you're happy to hear us. Well, in reality, it's just me here for the intro this evening. You see, Pete and I got together with the gentlemen from Best Coast Pairings and Down Under Pairings, which you may not even know have merged together to form one union known as Best Coast Pairings. I guess that makes sense. They were already the Best Coast Pairings, so you can't really top that. Down Under Pairings, it's down. Anyway, it makes sense that they kept the BCP branding. But it has been a really great development over the last couple of months as they sort of teased it out and then have recently been hitting the media circuit. Peter and I, of course, are podcast listening degenerates and have heard them on other shows, and we thought to ourselves, hey, we can ask them way better questions than that. So that's a shot fired across the bow of not only this unholy union of BCP and Down Under Pairings, but also other podcasts out there, because we're changing format, guys. It turns out you have to adjust in these times. In the time of a pandemic, you have to evolve to stay relevant. And we've decided to go from 40K Stat Center to 40K Chat Center because I thought that was kind of funny. Yeah, that's really the whole thing. So essentially, we're going to just do an interview. We're going to do a nice in-depth interview with those fellas. Peter is on the show, although he's pretty quiet until we actually start talking about stats. I thought he'd jump in. He was a little bit intimidated, I think. Josh Diffey's Australian. Throws people off, I know. So he's there. Don't worry, he's here. If you're not a Hef fan, if you're a Falcon person, that's fine. I get it. He's got feathers. He's well spoken, thick, luscious beard. I only have a mustache. It's understandable that you might play favorites with the host, and that's okay. That's why there's two of us. Of course, if you're interested in this format and you'd like us to do more, or maybe you've got some ideas for things that we should be doing that isn't this, feel free. Leave a comment or a message on perhaps our Facebook page. If we get this up on YouTube, hit up the YouTube comments. Maybe just yell at whatever you're listening to podcasts on. Just try and communicate to us what you'd like to hear. I was actually recently thinking, there's probably people out there who want to hear from all sorts of different folks. So if there's someone that you'd like us to do sort of an in-depth interview with, or just get on the show to have a nice chat with, please let us know. Dare to dream. Throw up a target for us. Throw up someone that maybe you haven't heard on a podcast yet out there, because there's a lot of people who get around on podcasts. Speaking of which, Peter and I have been appearing regularly in a similar chatty fashion on The Honest Wargamer. It's The Honest Wargamer on Twitch with Rob Symes, formerly known as Warhammer Rob, a great man of wargaming, and I get up at 7 a.m. Peter gets up at 5 a.m. and Rob rolls out of bed at noon and does a live stream every Tuesday. He's actually been live to air every single day since the lockdown started. I think he's around 70 episodes in a row right now, which is hilarious. So Peter and I have helped out probably with 5 or 6 of those. So if you're desperate for Heffelfinger Falcon content, that's a great place to go. Peter also made a really good appearance on the Best in Faction podcast. It was their 2-year anniversary. They had some great characters on there, and Peter was outstanding. We, of course, also continue to appear here on the Frontline Gaming Network, occasionally showing our voices on Chapter Tactics, and we're always listening to Art of War, as well as our friends, Reese and Frankie, telling us how it is on Signals from the Frontline. That's about it, folks. I don't think there's any reason more to belabor the point. I hope you're all staying optimistic, hopeful that one day you might be able to get out and do stuff you love again, and I think that day is coming soon. The world seems to be waking up a little bit, so hopefully this little interview here is just that piece of content that you needed because you've literally run out of everything else to listen to or watch. I get it. That's pretty much why I made this show. So thanks a lot, folks. Hope you enjoy it.
Tournament news is made possible by bestcoastpairings.com. Download the BCP TO app to organize events for just about any tabletop game system. Download the player app to easily find and participate in events from around the world. Subscribe to BCP for as little as $5 a month to support the team and unlock additional features. Available for iOS and Android. bestcoastpairings.com. Competitive events easier.
All right, everybody. As promised, the Falcon and I have brought in two of the finest guests, perhaps our first non-playing guests ever on 40K Now Chat Center. Thank you, COVID. We, of course, have Joshua Diffey from Down Under Pairings. Say hello.
G'day.
And then, of course, the one and only Paul McKelvey of Best Coast Pairings fame.
Howdy. How y'all doing?
Now, in case any of you missed it, we wanted to get these guys into a virtual room here because there was a great merger in the competitive 40K world. We have two fellas here, along with their wider teams, who have dedicated a good chunk of their adult lives to developing pairing systems. And they're a little bit of crosstown rivals for a little while, either spoken or unspoken. So maybe I just love to, just off the top, maybe we'll start with Diff. What is it that made you want to spend so much time making, Down Under Pairings? Why was this something that like really captured your imagination and decided to spend your free time on it?
Yeah, so it started in like 2015, maybe 2014. I ran events, and at the time there was only one, I'd say, cloud or web-based pairings solution out there that kept shit in the bed, and I used it a bunch of times, and it didn't do everything I wanted to do, and I had the skill set to make my own, and a couple of mates kept saying stop bitching about it and do something about it, and so I did, and so it started off very basic because that's all I needed it for, and then where I live in the deep south, down in Australia, we do things a bit differently down here for some reason. A lot
Isolation,
of our states,
perhaps?
Yeah, possibly. A lot of our states had varying composition scores for 40K, which is like a handicap or a soft score, or someone says your army's too tough, go home.
Pablo still thinks community comp exists.
It doesn't.
I know.
I can say that categorically. And so that just made things harder and harder, and so to manage for big events. And so I built that into it, and it kind of just then evolved into the beast that it is today.
Right on. And
started from a need that I had.
Okay, well that's good. Selfishness is a perfectly fine motivation. Paul, what about yourself? Why start up BCP?
Well, after I took the win for the first ITC there, I got asked to run a couple tournaments locally, and I'd never done it before, even though I'd been to, I don't know, a couple, 100 events.
Wait
at
a
that
minute,
point.
you sort of just left that off. Did you say you took the win for the first ITC there?
Yes.
You are the inaugural ITC champion. I knew that, but maybe our audience doesn't know that we were in such distinguished company here.
It was a much different world back then, but yeah, I saw the big check hanging on my wall.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What was the first check for?
$2,000.
That ain't bad.
Yeah, no. Especially, I mean, it was secret. Like, no one knew it was coming back then. So, like, when it happened, it was just, we were just fighting for bragging rights, and then get down there, and here's this giant check sitting there. And that was it was a little unexpected. And actually, I mean, we used that first check was used as the business preparation fees for BCP and stuff like that. Ultimately,
that's incredible.
But it was because of being asked to run tournaments after that I said, and Garrett and I were on the same competitive team, and so said, hey, I got asked to run this tournament, don't know what I'm doing. Garrett kind of casually mentions I could build an app for that. And a month later, we were running the tournament at a little event called Stockton Con in Stockton, California, and we used the very alpha version of the app at that point, and it was kind of popular. And the guys who were there asked us to keep building it out, and so we kept working on it, and then brought it to FLG, and the rest is history from there.
Yeah, and I think like a lot of acronyms, the ITC, FLG, BCP, some people kind of use them interchangeably in a lot of ways. How did that relationship start? How did you get to be sort of because I remember the old days of listening to signals from the front line, and you know, you could hear the wear and tear on Reese's voice when he was like updating the ITC points that week, and I'm sure his spreadsheet was complicated. So how did that wind up? How did you wind up sort of taking on, you know, running the rankings and stuff for the ITC?
Well, it was, I mean, I don't think a lot of people really understand how close-knit and small the community was back then in NorCal. It was before the guys moved down south and everything. And so everyone kind of saw everyone at tournaments, and we were all kind of in the same group. And, you know, it was just kind of, even at that point, Garrett lived out in the Bay. And not in Virginia like he does now. And so he was going in into their shop and talking to them, and I'm not exactly sure how it got, you know, to that point, but I know that Garrett said, hey, this, you know, we need to come up with a way of, you know, marketing this to them and making it usable. And just kind of the trail led down from that. I mean, I was, had to find a way to make it work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was pretty, because I mean, my first real exposure to it, I don't even know if I was there the first year it was used at the LVO or if I just listened to it, but it was sort of like the coming out party for BCP was certainly one of the LVOs, 4 years ago?
Yeah, it would have been 4 years ago now.
Yeah. And so, you go ahead.
Yeah, it would have been 4 years ago. We had it was very different system back then to what it is now. I mean, the LVO was, I mean, that year it took a jump from, I think, 180 to 300.
Sure.
And that's the year that we kind of kicked it in. And that was kind of the spot where, you know, everyone kind of said that an event that size wouldn't have happened without having some kind of pairing software to do it. People were still doing things mostly on spreadsheets at that point.
Yeah. And I think it was just the mind. I think, you know, if BCP had some secret sauce, it would be, you know, working with the ITC closely, but also you had an app. I mean, that was mind-blowing, although you didn't realize that most of the world outside of California doesn't use an iPhone for a while. That's fine, because you had an app, and I think that was pretty wild. Now, down under, how are you guys, like, reacting and rolling? Because I guess you guys started roughly the same time. Who was actually first?
I know our very first live event, so I guess our launching event was the 9th of April 2016.
So yeah,
and it was an event called The Hunt.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I talked about that before. It was Broadside Bash, April of 2016.
Really?
It was on 420. I just that date stuck out to me for no particular reason.
So we beat you. We beat you. Down on the Pairings beat you by like 2 weeks.
That's amazing. And I'm go ahead.
Yeah, it was LV. I mean, that was when we first. That's the date we launched into the public. Like the public could use us. I mean, because we were used at the LVO before that, which was in January, but it wasn't. No one else could use it at that point. I mean, the first beta test was in October previous to that, or alpha test, I should say. Yeah, but it was. I mean, yeah. Actually, the 420 was the launch in the App Store. Like people could download it and use it.
Yep.
But yeah. It's funny we hadn't talked about that before.
So how long was it before you before you two were even aware that there was sort of another pairing system sort of evolving almost at the exact same timeline?
That's a good question too. You know, I really don't remember, to be honest. There wasn't a because even outside of, you know, DUP and BCP, there's a couple other systems out there too.
I know.
So I mean, I guess. Haven't really kept a pulse on when everything arose, but I mean, like there's a handful of other competitors out there, and we just kind of I don't know, I didn't mark it on a calendar or anything like that to be honest. That's when I started noticing it.
Yeah.
Well, I think from my side, I reckon it would have been I think it would have been in 2018 around CanCon weekend. I think maybe it was 2019 on CanCon weekend.
Mhm.
Because CanCon used Best Coast pairings. And at the time, I don't think I'd really paid much attention to what people were using other than Down Under pairings.
Yeah.
Because at the time, I guess for us, when we launched it, I launched it. It was a new world for tournament organizers, and they are a precious bunch. And I put myself in that same category. And some of them are a little slower to adopt change, and some of them are a little scared of change. And there were a lot of events where basically they wouldn't use it unless I was there to remind them to do something, basically. Now that went away after time because they got used to it, and I think it became the norm of having something besides a spreadsheet that they've used for 20 odd years.
Yeah.
But I think as we probably got past the first year of Down Under pairings, I started reaching out to people outside my state because that was just a on the side thing for me. So I wasn't traveling to an event outside of my state to hold someone's hand,
Right.
because I didn't have time, or I was playing in the event. Because at that time I was probably playing in 3 events a month.
That's insane and awesome.
Yeah, 2016. I think 2016 was probably my busiest 40K year. Maybe around then.
Well,
Insane.
we all experience peak 40K. We just don't know when it's going to be, guys. So I think I could talk to you guys about the backstory for a while, but I'd love to fast forward a little bit. And before we get to the rosy, marriage between you guys, I thought I might bring up the fact, this year, January 2020, CanCon weekend, LVO weekend, maybe not the smoothest weekends for either organization. Diff, I think, what happened at LVO this year, we've covered elsewhere, but, what sort of challenges did you run into this year at CanCon?
Yeah, so CanCon was an Age of Sigmar event because for those playing at home that probably listen to you guys a fair bit, CanCon is kind of like not to the same awe, but it's kind of the LVO of Australia. So it's a big convention.
It's a serious tournament. It's just big.
It's big. But it has multiple systems. So like Age of Sigmar, I think was 220 odd people. And 40K, I can't remember the exact number, but it was around mid hundreds, maybe 150, 160. So it was the biggest event we ran. I tested the ever living crap out of it because I was we hadn't run an event that size. I'd run multiple events, like plenty of multiple event weekends that would have well and truly capped that amount of players. But one of the things you learn pretty quickly when developing software of any kind is when you have 200 to 300 people hitting refresh on a page all at the exact same time is very different than having 500 people hitting refresh sporadically over a weekend.
Right.
So I thought I had tested it thoroughly. I'd worked my ass off to make sure it would work at a big size. And it started off pretty good. And then I had some calls from the TOs. There was some concerns at specific times. And it wasn't just like end of round where I thought it might have been everyone trying to submit their scores. It was at really random times. They were having performance issues. And so I contacted my hosting provider, basically saying, WTF, mate, because I had actually contacted them making sure that this would work, and they started looking into it, and it wasn't until that evening that they had confirmed that we were DOS attacked, which was surprising because it had never happened before. I'm not sure if it ever happened to BCP before. I know it happened to to Torrent of Fire for the first ETC they tried to run.
That's amazing.
So it's not like it's never happened before, but it just I thought who would deliberately do that? So
turns out people on the internet can be assholes.
Yeah. I actually and part of I think how the conversation kind of potentially the olive branch was because obviously things happened with LVO, which was not the same issue, but unbeknownst to me, I knew things were happening to BCP at the same time, and I reached out to, I think it was Pablo at the time, and basically said, this is what's happening to us. You might want to reach out to the BCP guys and just say, hey, could this be an issue? Turns out that wasn't the case, but it was a bit of an olive branch nonetheless. And I was in the process of moving pretty much down under Pairings to what's called AWS or Amazon Web Services, which is one of the big boys, like Facebook and all that jazz. And turns out BCP are on there too. So yeah, that was my plan, and then suddenly the conversations with BCP happened, and that kind of got sidetracked.
So before we get there, Peter and I, of course, that same weekend, we're live to you in Las Vegas. And Paul, you may not appreciate this, but I was experiencing technical failure of a smaller scale, but nonetheless, taking years off my life and making me go bald a little bit. And so your delay actually bought us some time. It got Pete, allowed us some time so that Pete could get out there, and we actually covered what round was that? That was when we were first up, Pete.
The first round that we actually had full coverage was round 3.
There you go.
Round 1 and 2 we had intermittent coverage, whatever we could get, right? Because you didn't know you could reboot a server remotely.
Yeah. My guy, the reason we failed was because my tech guy was supporting an event or something in Japan, and so he was living in a very different time zone at that time. But anyway, neither here nor there. Mr. McKelvey, I did talk to you a little bit immediately following that. So Diff's going through that kind of stress. What's it feel like, when that's going on and you're just trying to get through the weekend?
Wow, that is I think the best way I can say, respond to that is you just think to yourself, 2020 can't get any worse. And then
maybe too soon.
Just a curveball. No, it was very stomach churning. That was very difficult. Man, the best way I can describe that is I don't ever want to feel 1,000 sets of eyes staring at me again in that way.
In that way, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's different if you're up on stage, and it's a good thing. That's different. But when you got that many people looking at you, and that's not a fun place to be.
Yeah. Well, so Pete and I and the team, which included Mr. Adam Camilleri, which is the not so silent other half of DUP at the time, and still is. I'm not even sure.
Still is.
We were up every night. We were going up to the hotel room, and basically smelling each other's farts and just talking about how amazing we were. But we were also kind of fantasizing about how cool it would be if these two organizations maybe one day, either got, either hooked up or got talking and maybe conspired to make perhaps the greatest pairing system that the world had seen. And so it was a bit of a fantasy we had.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I brought up this fantasy in 2018, like back one of my first Chapter Tactics shows, because I'd been looking at both systems. And I said it out loud. I was like, why don't these two guys get together? Because it would be the best of both worlds. And little did I know, Josh had no idea that BCP existed because he, lives in a barn in the middle of nowhere, Australia. But we definitely had that talk. But I'd been, kind of espousing that for 2 years at this point. Well, a year and a half, I guess, at this point.
And so this is a cool manifestation of something I think we both kind of hoped for. And I guess now we can start talking about that union. So you're coming out of January. I don't know when did and how did this sort of union start percolating?
Oh, you're being a little what's the word I'm looking for? Humble in how it got brought together. Mr. Heffinger, we know that you were responsible for dumping me and Adam in a room, and kind of fireworks flew off from there.
Wow.
But that's it. Basically, the conversation just flowed organically. It was honestly, it went a lot like this. It was, do you like 40K? Yeah. Do you like 40K? Yeah. Hey, we should work together on this. We all like 40K.
Do you like round pairings for 40K?
But I mean, that's how it's. We all have the same vested interest in making sure the community grows. I mean, this has been part of my life for 20 years. It's a big chunk of what I do. And I think that the rest of my team is in that same boat. And talking with the DUP crew, it was a mirrored message. And so it just kind of flowed organically, and we decided it was better to not work separately. And it was kind of immediate. Started working with each other.
That's amazing. And so was there anything before that, like preventing this, or was it just sort of, sticking to your own lanes, kind of siloed and, half a planet apart from one another?
It was, I think that there was this unspoken, it was kind of like, I don't know what the best way to put it is. We thought that they had bad feelings towards us, and they thought that we had bad feelings towards them.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it was just kind of there was no reason for it. And I don't know if either team decided to just kind of get over the barrier and be like, hey, is this real? But I'm glad we did now.
I think it's probably fair to say it's the Australians' fault in this situation. Like, not specifically Adam and I, because I mean, if you go back, I mean, we streamed CanCon 40K in 2019, which was using Best Coast pairings. And we were fine talking about Best Coast pairings, and talking it up. What came out though was there are some Australians have this weird way of being dickheads sometimes. On the world stage.
Well, you're like super nationalistic, but you take it. You go right for the jugular. For the jugular. It's not just about how cool you are. It's just everyone else is garbage.
Yeah, so
I like it.
We'd have people that would probably trash talk us and down under pairings, but as soon as you then compare us with anything outside of Australia, we're suddenly the golden child, and we can't do anything wrong. Like it was a really weird dichotomy.
Well, I mean, in fairness to Australians, anything that's sort of outside of the light from the campfire will probably kill you. So it's a good healthy habit, I think, to be very,
But so we that first LVO, first CanCon that we streamed, we reached out through the Chapter Tactics podcast, because we'd been on there a couple of times, Adam and I, and because there was some bad blood brewing from other people that we just wanted to make crystal clear. It had absolutely nothing to do with us, and there was nothing we could do to stop them. And it's quite funny, because the conversation that ended up happening with Paul and the team and Adam and myself when we finally quote unquote got together was I think it was, I want to say Casey, but anyway, one of the BCP team basically said, how will your supporters or how will your followers take this? Because they could just be rabid dogs sometimes. And look, I'd say it to their face. So I mean,
guys, you're not making this easy for us.
The 40K community is very tight knit in worldwide, but especially when you start getting to your own neck of the woods.
Well, it's an in-person regional thing, and Peter and I get to straddle all of those different spheres and areas, and maybe that's That's why it was maybe easier for us to realize that you were two cool dudes that could probably get along, as are the other people involved. But I mean, beyond all that, I mean, you are, BCP and certainly in Down Under Pairings was also starting to monetize, but, actual businesses. Once you weren't, just talking pleasantries and realizing that, hey, wait a minute, these guys know what they're doing too. And, we can get along here. How did the business stuff shake out? Like, is it an actual formal merger? Are you partnered up? Like, how does that all go down?
Yeah, it's all one team now. I mean, we're under the BCP banner just because it was easier that way. But yeah, it's one team, one dream now.
So as BCP, and no disrespect to Josh here, I mean, you guys are the I don't know what your market share would be. Peter, gut take, how many tournaments are on BCP versus everything else?
86%.
86%. That's probably pretty accurate hot take, guys. I don't know what your research would tell you, Paul, but it's a lot, and certainly at the GT major level.
That's a GT major percentage. Yeah. I bet it's in the 90s for once you get RTTs involved, but
because there's Scotland and other places, and Australia until recently. So when you're looking to add something like DUP to the team, who are they've got their tournaments and they're committed. Organizers who work with them, but also, I mean, I think you're bringing in some talent and some skills. What did you see that was an appealing mesh aside from just mindset? What does Down Under Pairings add to the BCP experience that you thought, hey, let's actually work formally together?
Ooh, it's Josh's skill set is pretty extensive. I mean, that's you got a very skilled builder in there, and Adam is a really good talking point too, as far as he brings in.
He's a big talker.
Yeah, I mean, you guys. Anytime we can get someone to get themselves in front of a camera like that, or on a podcast or on a, that's just more legs to help you get out there. Because I mean, it's one of the things that I've seen about it's not just 40K, it's the gaming industry in general. Is that like even though we have this huge group of people who know about the tournament scene and the ITC and whatever other game we're talking about, right? It's the same across all of these. But still only accounting for a very small fraction of the population of the game, that game. And so the more people you can have, the more different ways that you can get eyes on you and what you do. I mean, it keeps growing. If COVID hadn't happened, the ITC would have grown exponentially this year.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's continued to do that every single year, right? So I mean, it's just, I think this is the year that even I right after LVO, seeing getting Josh on the team and everything like that too. It was, I mean, going to Gamma, in case you guys don't know, is a huge gaming trade show that we were at literally the week that stuff hit the fan for COVID,
right?
And it was very surreal to be there as COVID was unfolding, but it was, BCP has actually made a name in the gaming industry in multiple games, and
yes, people
know to look for it. And I mean, we're working on some stuff with some players in the industry and stuff too. But it's I lost my train of thought here, but that having that name out there and
skill set,
it's getting in front of people. It's you still run into lots of stores and manufacturers, publishers that just didn't even know about the competitive scene, didn't know about even for their own game systems. It's kind of crazy. So it's the more people you can have voicing what you do, and the more podcasts you can get on, the more websites you can get talking about you, the more you can grow as a pairing software, as a league, as a podcast. I mean, it's just we don't touch as many people as we think we do to account for the depth of our communities. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa. Back it up, Diff.
Hey, it's social distancing.
It's true.
Yeah, we're as distant as you can get. We're in 4 different time zones here, folks. This is very safe. And by the way, thank you, Josh. You're up at a very early hour. It's like when we're on Honest Wargamer. So Diff, so on the other side of things, like you're getting sort of keys to the not quite the kingdom, but like BCP is pretty badass. They've got massive user base, and so you get to join the team and start adding to it. What was the thing you were like most looking forward to being able to add to things or bring to the table as a new member of the team?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things I've been quite into for quite some time, especially around competitive 40k, is stats, which is no surprise to most of the people on this podcast. And Down Under Pairings was it had a much as discussed, a much smaller piece of the pie, so to speak. But we were doing some pretty cool stuff with stats and player profiles and faction trends and all that kind of cool stuff. But the amount of games was just it was relevant to Australians, but it wasn't relevant to non-Australians, if that makes sense, because what factions are doing well in Australia with a small data set is kind of not so representative of a larger meta. And so when I came over, or I guess coming back a few steps on how it kind of actually happened, I know there was the conversation that Adam and Paul had, thanks to Val, but what originally started was Adam and I didn't think that was a merge was actually going to happen. It wasn't something in our minds that was likely to occur. What we were hoping to do was get access to BCP data to fill out our stats engine. And then Paul's like, well, we want to do stats. I'm like, okay. And yeah, so the biggest thing for me was getting my hands on just a metric ton of data. So for 2019, 40k, so Jan 1st to 31st of December, there was over 85,000 games of Warhammer 40,000 in Best Coast Pairings.
That's wild.
That's not including the data that we have that was imported, so people who imported their spreadsheets that we still know win-loss ratios for. That is literally just events using Best Coast Pairings. That's how many games we have. So 40k. It's
before we deep dive into stats, because I think I'll probably let Falcon lead the party there. I do want to just double back, and again, not to be a bummer, but I'm a huge believer in both of what you guys have been doing. I think you're so valuable, and I was certainly nowhere near as heartbroken as or experiencing what Paul was going through on the LVO, but that was a big boo-boo on a big stage. And I'm just curious to know, do you guys feel like this merger, adds capacity to the team to maybe add some more redundancy, or to, approach how things are structured to give BCP, that more installation, more reliability going forward to larger and larger events?
I do. If nothing else, it's another set of eyes on everything. Post LVO, we took some deep dives into things, and I mean, I think it's been beat up before, but what brought down BCP at LVO was not something that normally should have brought down anything. Mm-hmm. I think that the checks have been made to make sure that it won't happen again, and adding Josh to the team is just another set of eyes that's going to help them make sure that things are going the way they should.
So, I mean, I've heard like some pining maybe for some features around BCP. One thing that Down Under Pairings has, which is interesting because you have the app, which is awesome, but there isn't that browser based experience, right? And as a result, maybe no opportunity to have things offline. I don't know if that's even possible, but just sort of redundancies that might make things survivable in the event of like a denial of service attack, or something messed up happening with some AWS minutiae that somehow winds up screwing everything up, which is what happened at the LVO. Is there something like the front end, back end merging together that might add a little bit of some redundancies or things that can help out in future events?
Ultimately, at some point, we'll have to have an offline mode or a fail-safe mode. The nature of the way that either system works, or this system moving forward works, is the internet is built on using lots of different programs to make programs work. And if, unfortunately, one of the side effects is if one of those programs doesn't work, that it can cause a cascade effect and make other programs not work. Yeah. There's really no way to have the kind of tools that we've developed, whether in the BCP space or the DUP space, and not rely on cloud infrastructure. And if we have put tons and tons of thought and time into trying to figure out ways to make it work, and you just ultimately lose out on what makes these things what they are.
Right.
So it's something that we continue to have as a project we'd like to accomplish. But it's one of those things that it's a trade-off. What do you give up to make something like that happen? That's a fail-safe. Which, I mean, it's realistically, if something like AWS goes down, the internet's down. It's not just BCP. It's everything. Like when it happened, and actually that did happen one time for BCP, is that AWS went out. It wasn't our fault, but almost all the websites on the East Coast completely stopped working. So it wasn't anything we could do about it. It was a basically what the internet runs on just went away.
Yeah.
The route and the wheel stopped for a cheese break.
Yeah. And so I mean, we have it as one of the projects we want to do is have an offline support. We have an idea on what we want to do to make that happen. It's one of those things about what do we give up as a project to build that. And so what we focused on was reinforcing and making improvements to what we've already had. And that's what we focus on in the meantime, because ultimately it's one of those things that we don't want to sacrifice on what we can do for something that someone might see once in 1,000 events.
Right.
So that's basically we put our efforts into things that are making this better, not just a potential failsafe that you don't ever actually want to use in the first place.
Also on one of the things that Adam and I were discussing as part of the merge or the pair up or whatever buzzword you want to throw at it, was reliability and LVO, and one of the advantages of getting someone like myself who's got a bit of a tech background chatting with the BCP lads was we could talk infrastructure and discuss the technical side of it, and it's really hard to really get across to people the specifics of what went wrong. And the post that went out just after LVO, I think, did a really good job of explaining it. However, from my perspective, when I was able to take that and ask a few questions, I mean, Adam and I pretty much said we wouldn't go ahead if we weren't confident that something like what happened at LVO, and to be honest, what happened at CanCon for us wouldn't happen again. So my plan for making sure something didn't happen to Down Under Pairings again, like happened at CanCon, was to move to AWS, because it effectively would resolve that issue. The BCP issue has been resolved, and as far as I'm concerned, it's done, it's dusted, it's in the past, and a lot of people out there that probably were at LVO may have a bad taste in their mouth, but may not have necessarily taken, BCP's word, so to speak, at it. But I can say we wouldn't have gone ahead with the merge if we weren't confident that that was a non-issue. So take that
awesome
as it is, I guess, or for what it is. But yeah.
No, the only reason I bring it up is because I think of exactly what Josh said, and also, I mean, we're talking about a system here that handles a ton of events, hitch free. The BCP guys, just like in Australia for Down Under Pairings guys, you're in person at a lot of the larger events, providing like on site, support. You are literally physically accountable to what's going on the ground, and so I've always been big supporters of you guys, and I think this is going to put a lot of new energy into BCP and help you overcome it, because you're going to add a lot of cool stuff, and I think that's maybe where we should segue to seamlessly, which is what Diff was trying to get to, which is stats, player profiles. Paul, I don't know if you realize this, but you may have hinted at it on a podcast, like, I don't know, right around when I feel almost like when you started, you were talking about player profiles, personalized stats. It's always been, the closest thing to vaporware that BCP has. And mostly I know that because I was so excited about that concept. And so now here we are, BCP, DUP are together, and it seems like stats are what you guys are leading with. So what are some of the exciting things that you guys are doing around, personalized stats or even meta stats?
Sure. So at the moment we're rolling it out to, and it'll be in the imminent. We're talking days, not weeks. But it'll be rolled out with 40K to start with, and then other game systems very promptly afterwards. So we're leading with two main views, so player and faction. So we have what we call a meta-analysis page, which basically is going to show the top 5 factions by win rate, where they have at least 1% of the meta. So if you've got some weird wonky like Assassin's list that somehow managed to go 5 wins and they're the only person to run pure Assassins, so suddenly they have a 100% win rate, it won't show. At least not on the meta-analysis, because that just doesn't make sense. And then we have the top 5 factions by meta percentage. So there'll be no surprise here, but Marines hold up 12.26% of the 2019 year. Orcs were 5th at 5.85, which I think was one of the surprising stats for me anyway. And then we have the top 5 players by win rate and top 5 players by number of games. So shout out to John Starks with 86 games on Best Coast Pairings in 2019. It's a few games.
It's just a couple.
Yeah, and then basically what we're doing is we've got a more in-depth faction or more in-depth player analysis. So for Marines or Adeptus Astartes, for example, there's a pretty graph of win-loss, ties, win percentage versus their season percentage. So this is the kind of stuff that I think probably interests some of the people following Stats Center. So what would be so Marines had for the calendar year a win percentage of 52.275%. When do you think they broke their average though, as in got above their average? Because you can imagine that Marines didn't have a flat kind of win rate over the year. It kind of escalated as we got close to that end of the year. What we can tell you what like the exact weekend it went above. Any guess?
Just say it. What is it?
8th of September 2019.
So the week after they became eligible to be the week after they became eligible to be played in tournaments.
Yeah, and they were immediately jumping. Now it's interesting when you say, when people say jumping with win rates. I mean, they only jumped like what did they jump? They jumped like 2 or 3%, which doesn't sound like a lot initially, and then they jumped quite a bit. But like that's a big jump when you consider most factions sits pretty close to 50% win rates, as you guys would know. The person who's played the most Marine games, I think, is Patrick
McEnany.
Yeah, that one. And he has a 75% win rate. So I mean that's that's solid. Is 60 wins.
He's had a good win rate for like 2 years with them. He ran Ultramarines and I believe White Scars at one point.
Yeah. So yeah, we take a look at some trends. We take a look at then specific players that have played that, and then we have the same. Excuse me. We have the same kind of trend charts for them player analysis. So he had a couple of Patrick had a couple of spikes. Didn't have a great February of 2019, but then it only went up from there pretty much. So it's just what I'm really keen to see is start putting in specific time points on these charts. So obviously, I put out a date of when Marines started doing well, and Falcon being Falcon was able to say, oh, that's because that's when Marines dropped or were eligible. I want that kind of stuff on the chart somehow, so as people can go, okay, so some things take 2 weeks for it to, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Some never make the cut, even once they get a new book. So it's really interesting to see some of these stats trend over a season, rather than just what they are right now.
So I have a little bit of a sneak peek here. This is probably one of the first legitimate scoop perks I've ever had as a 40K podcaster. So thank you for this, guys.
You are.
So I just sorted the games played by I sorted the list by games played. So the leader that I get here when I do that is actually John Lennon, 77 games played, 66 and 10 is and then one tie. But the one that blew my mind here is that this is calendar year, right?
Yeah, calendar year. Yep.
All right, so 2019 calendar year, TJ Lanigan, 73 wins, one tie, 2 losses in 76 games played. Just about the entire top 10, by the way, folks, is our names that you would recognize. We have John Lennon, TJ Lanigan, Jim Vessel, Richard Siegler, Evan Stump. No, who's Evan Stump, Pete?
Evan Stump is a Tau player from, what area is that? Like the Midwest, I want to say. He puts in a large number of like small GTs. See his name pretty regularly. He top forward, I think, 3 events last year. 3 GTs.
58 games. Jessica Bowman, by the way, she had the 5th most amount of games played, 67 games. Brian Paulin, Jason Bird, Daniel Olivas, Nick Nanavati. These are all people, almost everyone. I don't know if Evan Stump was on our show. Must have been. Almost every single one of them have been on this show. And I just want to point out that immediately, people who win games, I think, probably play a lot of games. That probably is a bit of a correlator there.
Well, I'd say it's, to win a lot, you have to play a lot, but you don't necessarily, just because you play a lot doesn't mean you win a lot. There's plenty of people out there. One of the things I've, ever since...
Lowest win percentage in all the names I just listed was 77%.
Yep.
So, yeah, you're still winning a lot. Anyway.
Well, so are you looking at the 2019 season or the 2019 season for a specific faction?
I'm looking at 2019 Warhammer 40K player analysis.
Okay.
So it's just the big stats for everybody, which this is actually literally something only I guess like Pete would have had an idea of some of these. It is calendar year though. Would love to see this in ITC year. So Pete, what are some of your feelings here? Like these guys are about to take your job.
Well, that's what I've been asking for a year and a half. So I'm very glad if they can make it work out. And so far, Josh and I have had a couple quick talks about this stuff. I really like what they're doing. There's a few things I want to make sure they're looking at. And one of them is that kind of like garbage in, garbage out. What are you looking at from a filters perspective? Because one thing I've noted, doing this for so long is we don't, BCP and DUP to a smaller extent never had like a stopgap for players to just put in garbage for their lists or for what they're actually playing. So there was a lot of error there. I'm assuming, Josh, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, like this isn't actually looking at the player list, right? When it's saying what faction these people are playing, it's just looking at the name and then whatever they put in as their top faction, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
So if they said
correct. Yeah.
So if they said Dark Mechanicum, that's what it is. So from my experience, that's about a 12% error rate right there, in people just choosing whatever willy-nilly versus actually choosing like the faction they actually play. So that's something that I'm curious as to if that's a step you're going to look at correcting. Also this does include everything, RTTs, etc. And that can cause issues because that error rate goes up when you look at RTTs. It's why I didn't do them. It had less to do with time because I can make time, I guess, for why I didn't cover RTTs, and more because the fewer people, the less important the results were.
Please don't make Pete do RTTs. I like them too much.
A locale perspective, because you can have like a 6-person RTT in a basement, and the results there may not matter as much as et cetera, et cetera. And on top of that, Very rarely are those lists actually published. Sometimes you'll see RTTs that are 8 players and everyone ran Space Wolves, which probably isn't what actually happened. So those are all things that I'm just curious about, just to make sure that we're getting the most accurate data we can. Is that stuff you're looking at? Because I know like BCP implemented that super cool like list checker, quote unquote, that's, that probably can be expanded on. Is that something you guys are looking at, or like, where are we
100%.
going from here?
Yeah, so there's a couple of questions there. So I'll start with
There's like 8. I'm sorry,
yeah,
but that's
all right. I'll start with
this
the
is the stuff
accuracy
I'm
bit.
excited about.
I'll start with the accuracy bit about factions. So we do the BCP does have the list parser. So at the moment, we are just looking at the faction that was I guess self-recorded. Which will line up with things like ITC faction awards. So if someone has, so at the moment, initially, it is effectively going to be community policed for the I guess the pointy end. So if someone said they ran Genestealer Cult when technically they didn't because they had I don't know a Tyranids detachment or something.
Yep.
Then,
Very common. Yep.
Yeah. Or someone said they were Thousand Sons, but they weren't. They were Chaos because they had a Demon's detachment or whatever. That kind of stuff, unfortunately, right now, I mean, that will still be there, and it will be based on, if someone was winning lots and they're in the faction awards, someone will bring that up, just like they do now. But it's not going to help us with the faction-wide stats where you've got little Timmy in a smaller event that no one looked at the fact that he's been putting the wrong factions down. That's stage one, but we are looking at then implementing the list parser to then do a deeper dive. So one is looking at factions and making sure the factions quote unquote correct on the list. The other one is looking at units. So I'm really keen on starting to do some deep analysis on what units are winning, potentially even what unit combinations, which might be a little trickier. But when did Smash Captains become the winning addition to a certain archetype, that kind of stuff, and it's when they were released. But so that's from an accuracy standpoint, it is something we're going to be looking at. It will be self-reported factions for the time being. As far as the size,
So
right
can I throw something out there?
Yeah.
So just on that data quality thing, and I don't even know where I learned this concept, but a lot of times when you're doing data entry and you're trying to get people to put things in correctly, you limit the amount of fields that they have to enter. And if you really want them to enter in the correct thing, you don't let them continue without doing that thing. Have you guys, is there any thought? Because I've pitched it to tournament organizers. The idea of minimum standard to get ITC points. You got your lists in, and your factions are right, and not just a picture of a napkin with your list, but you actually cut and paste a friggin' list into BCP or post it somewhere publicly for people who have tinfoil on their heads about using an app. So like just means of saying there's accountability for the data that goes in, because I mean, you guys as a business, as this is a feature, you're self-interested to make sure that this data is actually representative, that's actually good. Are there any things that you could do to help, encourage people or force people to, make sure that their, factions in there, or, that their list is posted, that kind of thing?
Yes and no. So I'll start with the yes part. So yes, I mean we could force people to do things, but generally speaking, it just creates a barrier, especially for smaller events. I think where you started mentioning, to be eligible for ITC points, you have to do X, Y, or Z. Well, that's probably more of an FLG ITC question than specifically Best Coast pairings. What we will be allowing at a later date is the ability to filter on circuit. So rather than necessarily just calendar year, you'd be able to say, all right, I'm the 2019 ITC circuit, or or whether it be other game systems or whatever, or even a local league. So you might be in a store, and that store might have their own little circuit going of one event a month, and they want to run stats on their circuit. So what that would then effectively mean is that circuits can define their own restrictions on what's in there.
Like I would throw out even like, if you said, you can use BCP, you can do whatever you want with it, but if you want stats to be tracked, like if you take this box, then there might be a more, restricted way of entering in the player information. You know what I mean? Like just something, because that way a TO could say, no, I'm not going to force my players to do that, and they opt out or whatever. And then the players don't get their stats and they get pissed. And then the TO realizes that, hey, I can just tell my players, you got to cut and paste your list into this thing because you're using friggin' Battlescribe anyway. Just like things that help change behavior. Because I think if you can use features to drive behavioral change, which is exactly what BCP did in the first place. Like it was impossible to have any kind of a list publicly posted outside of like the Blood of Kittens guy, like sleuthing them out, prior to this. So like there are ways. I'm just trying to encourage, using my platform here a bit to encourage you guys to look at ways to like just engineer some social change on that front, because that's really the final frontier. Is if a list is in there right, you can check to see if you can eventually be able to check to verify whether that faction is correct.
Well, and that's what the parser will. I mean, ultimately we have the parser set up, so the parser will say, hey, this person. It won't change your faction for you, but we'll say this faction is not matching what you put in. So we'll throw flags up to the TO, so the TO can see it, the community can see it. I mean, the best policing we have available to us is the community, and that's not going to change. But I mean, this is also kind of a problem that only exists in the miniature space. I mean, we start dealing with the card games. It's if you don't submit your list, you don't play.
Right.
But it kind of only. It did this idea of trying to keep your hidden sauce and things like that is only kind of it only exists in our game, our miniatures community, and I don't really not sure what the answer is there, but it's cool to have the DUP guys on too, that we can have this extra bandwidth to build out the extra cool things. And one of the things that I think Valley, you and I have talked about it quite some time ago is actually even in doing achievements. And so we can add player profiles and throw up badges and things like that. If you're someone who has 100% list submission, you get a badge. Something to that effect is. I think it's instead of, we don't want to punish players for behaviors, we want to reward good behaviors and remove. It's a balancing act to try and make sure that we don't make further complications to the tournament organizer, because that's the person we want to inconvenience the least. It's what can we do to incentivize the players to do the action we want them to. And I think things like badges, and then on top of that, the risk of public shame is the other big one. So that's always a driving force.
Heck yeah.
I just think a big thing for me, looking at the stats from Josh here, is I just want to make sure that we're as accurate as possible whenever we can be. So if that means you have a filter that's just set up that says, hey, any event that had less than 85% list submission, we don't include the stats. And it can just be a filter. If you want it and you want to see what everything is and just, go with the potential error rate, go by all means do it. But I think stuff like that at least improves the viewership from someone like myself. And I mean, it's very selfish, but it's what I am. It's what I am. Or, to a lesser extent, the guys that actually make the rules for this game, because I know that they look at the stats, and so they will probably want to use something like BCP stats in order to make adjustments. And if the stats aren't accurate, that gives me a little bit of the goosebumps, a little bit of the pimples. And I just want to make sure that when this goes forward, we've got the best stuff we can for the game.
No, for sure. And so, look, so do we. I mean, the whole reason I started doing stats in Down Under Pairings was because it was what excited me, because I'm a crazy person like yourself. And yeah, I did it because it's something I was really keen to see, and I too want to make sure that it is as accurate as possible. At the moment, if someone doesn't have a faction listed, then we're only tracking their individual result for that game um, rather than the faction they played, because we don't know it. But we are tracking currently every every game by player, by faction, by player by faction, faction versus faction, and player faction versus faction, which is a bit of a mouthful there. But we are at least tracking how many times, Fred was playing Marines against Tau, and or just playing Marines, or how many games Fred just played. Now, yes, we've got to work on trying to get that list parser to try and suggest factions to people a little better. And that is on our cards, but right now it is player policed. As far as then additional filters, which some of the things that that Falcon kind of dished out. One of the things I am looking at, or we are looking at putting in, is some event size kind of filters. So potentially things like, for only major events, what's it look like, or for only RTTs, and then or for GTs, or like basically putting in event size kind of parameters to give you a look at a specific kind of section of the meta.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you gave the example of trying not to include RTTs, but I'm also interested in the stats you kind of throw out there that they might be using for rules, but they also, there might be companies out there that are also trying to work out how popular an army is. And sometimes popularity does not mean they do well at large events. I mean, what's space? You talk about that event that had 8 Space Wolf players. That actually might have been a thing.
Oh yeah.
I think those RTTs sometimes show some really quirky stats. Now, I'm not suggesting you should use those to change rules. But as far as popularity, it's still relevant.
And I think that probably is why you also see something like I've heard you talk in a lot of other places that you keep being mind blown by orcs appearing so high up on your meta share, which I think wouldn't be that surprising depending on the stretch.
No, I mean, orcs held between 5 and 6% of the meta share since their book came out. So it's like the fact that he said they were like at 5.5 or whatever. That's just what they've been. I don't think they've ever dropped below a 5.
When did their book drop?
What, end of 2018?
November 2018.
Because it was Renegade Open was the first event they were used. Yep. So,
I guess from my perspective, when they dropped, around the LVO of 2019, around that time, there was a lot of orc lists. There was also the orcs were doing quite well. And then as the year went on,
I think they only ever broke 8. They broke 8%, I think, very, very briefly. It was the highest they ever were.
Surprisingly high, though. Yeah, it was. That was the GT level anyway. Yeah,
that was for a couple weeks, really, before things went kind of south for them. They were only 2 to 3% of the meta before their book dropped. So, but that's neither here nor there. This is just the stuff I'm always curious about when it comes to automating statistics. Is we just have to make sure that we're able to filter out the noise, right?
And another thing,
we'll be able to filter out some of it with size filters.
And then another thing, have you thought about, and I'm sure you have, like geospatial filters? Is that something you guys would consider? So can you track by what particular area? Because I think that is something that a lot of people are very interested in. We talk a lot about local metas on our podcast on Stat Center. We've talked about it with you all the time. Whenever we bring up Australia, is like they're so weird with their horde meta that never went away. Things like that. So I think that's something that I would love to see automated.
Yeah, for sure. So I think what we're trying to work out is the best way of handling regional areas or regional zones. So one of the things circling right back to some of the things talked about earlier about Amazon and all that sort of stuff. So one of the things that Best Coast Pairings has done very well that down at Pairings never really looked at. Never thought it was a need, and then now I wish I did. Was when you set up. I mean, they do integration with Google Maps stuff. So basically, when you put in an event and you say where it is, behind this, like Google tells us for the address you put in what the coordinates are. So longitude, latitude stuff. So the idea being that we'll be able to do things like include events within within 100 kilometers of me. So rather than say Australia or a state, being able to actually put in like distance, which I think is pretty cool.
That's great for finding events too.
Yeah,
which I think is what they use that for. Yeah.
So the little sneak peek that I sent through to you guys. So
super badass.
So the home page, which looks very similar to the existing Best Coast Pairings homepage, it will list the next 5 events within, I think it's 2 weeks, if my memory serves me correctly, sorted by geolocation. So the top one is the closest event to you. So you can get a quick snapshot of how far events, of the events that are near you. Which, if you're looking for a game, if you're jonesing for some 40k when this COVID thing finally disappears, then you'll be able to find the one closest to you, not just which I'm pretty excited about.
There. By the way, so I know we got the gotcha moments that we were looking for. Basically, Pete is not obsolete just yet. I think even if you did demonstrate to him that your data was perfect, he would probably still deny it and continue to sift through lists in all of his spare moments.
Oh no. No.
But what I would say, what I really want to say is like, so I do have my little sneak peek here, and for one thing, one of my most wished for features of all time, Pete will like this too, is that you can click on an event and it opens in a separate window. When I go back to my original search, it's still there. It's just, it's bringing a tear to my eye, guys. There's so many like basic, like not basic, but like just like user experience improvements here. Like just on this first, this is probably still even just an early evolution of what you guys are doing with the web stuff. But this portal, like immediately, like the usability of being able to move around and find things that I'm looking for, incredible. And so as you add more filters, which probably in your list of jobs to do, Diff is likely one of the easier ones. Like it'll just become even more and more usable. I think this is really awesome development. So, and on the stats just to say, like on the stats themselves, like I love looking at like just asking. It's like having a magic 8-ball, right? Like so you can just ask it questions, and stuff like at the high end of who played the most amount of games. I was able to answer that in like quick seconds. You combine that, who played the most amount of games in my neighborhood. That's even cooler, right?
Yeah.
So what are some of the questions you guys are excited to ask your magic 8-ball of stats? Well, what are the things that you're really keen to get in the hands of people that they're going to be able to see and find out?
Well, there's 2 things I'm really excited about. One is something I want to do, and one is something that I'm hoping others will want to do. I'm hoping they also want to do my one as well. But basically, I want to have for factions, I want to have overlaid data, and what I mean by that is I want to show the entire faction. So let's just pick Marines for an example. All right, I want to show their trends. I want to show their stats. But then over the same chart, and I haven't worked out how I classify this, I want to show the top players ratios. So whether that's the top 5, top 10%, based on rankings or whatever, and show theirs. So when a faction first drops, in some cases like Marines, I mean, it just kind of auto started winning. But there are other factions that take a lot more finesse, and you have to kind of find that secret sauce. I'm really interested to see how quickly players like TJ, like your Nanavardis, Sieglers, etc., how quickly they pick up a secret sauce versus when they become, the new black, so to speak. When does a list become good because someone like TJ wins a big event and they're on stream and everyone sees it, and so the next week suddenly everyone's taking it, or that kind of stuff. So that's one thing that I'm really keen on looking at. The other one I've been chatting with Paul about is to get, and it'll probably be initially at least for BCP subscribers, but to have like a Facebook group where we're going to do, whether it be weekly or monthly, stat insights. So there are some specific stats that are really hard to kind of make a generic thing for. Like I know, the Falcon, he's done a whole bunch of, how many knights are in a list, or, that kind of stuff. It's very hard to be very specific, but also cover every possible scenario. You kind of have to be specifically looking for something. So I'm hoping to have kind of people request going, and then we have a little vote, and we chuck out like 5 very specific stats, like a month or something that people can look for. Like how many lists have, I don't know, more than 2 units of Nurglings? A very like random thing that someone voted for.
That's a great idea for a non sequitur Twitter account. Like there were 75 Renegade Knights played this weekend. Check out BCP. I think that's awesome. Pete, any final grilling questions here?
Nope. Josh and I have talked offline about this, I guess online, but like off of this before, and we will continue to, I'm sure. I'm very excited for everything that's coming, because this is what I've been talking about for, like I said, like a year and a half, almost 2 years now. So I just can't wait. Can't wait to see how it all plays out, and for the day that I don't, well, I guess I haven't for the last like 2 months, I haven't had to spend like 20 hours a week tabulating stats, because these guys will do it for me, and I can just lay back with my margarita and dream of better things.
Well, and
that day's
actually
coming.
so rather than spending 20 hours doing tabulating results, it's spending that 20 hours looking at results and actually digesting it.
No, I won't do that.
Or better yet, that's like 3 or 4 games.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you something, Paul. Like, I don't know if you know where I live. My options for games are against like local black bears and wolves. I really don't have anybody to physically play against. So, and black bears are poor losers.
Ugh.
Okay, I'm going to ask one question. You guys have shown some like wicked features we've been waiting for, and I tried to end it on a high note, but instead I'm going to ask you for something that's not here, which I'm curious about, which is, will we be able to, using a web browser, look at lists?
Yes.
Very, very soon.
There you go, guys. You just got me. I'm re-upped.
So
you got my subscription again, another year.
So we completely changed tack on late March, early April. So Paul talked about Gamma early on in the segment. So we had and still have we had a beta kind of being able to create events and request tokens and all that kind of stuff through this same web app. So the plan was to roll out TO functions, then player functions via a web app. So you could access it in an iOS app, an Android app, or on a browser. And then COVID hit, and we thought, well, there's not too many events running right now. Let's jump on stats, because that's something that that we can digest right now. And so we kind of changed tangent. But you'll be able to. The plan is, longer term, is anything you can do in the iOS and Android app, you'll be able to do a similar, if not same function in the browser. And open it in new tab.
I guess it's also worth noting, and I haven't said this on anyone else we've talked to, so you guys are going to kind of get a little inside scoop here too. But so one of the things we did too is we upgraded the payment system. So before March, we only covered American dollars, Canadian dollars, and kind of Australian dollars. It wasn't really fleshed out on Australian dollars. But as of now, BCP should support, I think it's 22 different currencies. So we actually can work in a lot of the European countries and virtually anywhere that you want to sell tickets to your events. And I think that's going to be a really big feather in our cap to helping get a lot of those tournaments going towards the ITC and just using BCP in general, because ticket sales drives tournaments to use the system.
Did you figure out like whatever Scotland uses for money? Because they're the ones that I need you guys to start getting to use BCP, because they're like writing everything down on pieces of paper or like on rocks or whatever the frig they do is real garbage and hard to track.
Well, it's unfortunately virtual sheep isn't a thing, so we can't. I shouldn't say that. Every time I've had to deal with them, they've been very awesome guys. But no, they should be covered too. So
good.
Yeah, I'm personally very excited about that feature too, because I know that it's one of the things that a lot of the UK and Europe has wanted to be able to make sure that they can be ticketing through us. That's an option now too. So it's as things start to open back up, we'll just be seeing a lot more tournaments using BCP. Just if not just for all the other neat stuff we have coming out and that we already do, but they can do ticket sales through us. So I think that helps drive attendance and promotes events and helps to get the word out there about your event being there, and helps people like yourself, Falcon, to track those events, and it makes the world go round.
Okay, so if there's nothing else to say, I really appreciate both of your time. Diff, I know you're just getting started with your day. Pete, thanks for coming along. Even Paul McKelvey, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for having us.
This was a really great chat, and hopefully relevant and interesting to at least some people out there, because I know Pete and I both are big fans of yours and super into this for some reason.
All 6 people.
This has been 40K Stats Center, a presentation of the Frontline Gaming Podcast Network. Like what we do? Subscribe to and rate us on YouTube and wherever podcasts can be found. Join the conversation. Follow 40K Stats Center on Facebook. You can also support the show directly by joining the Chapter Tactics Patreon and competitive 40K in general via the ITC Patreon, or by grabbing a subscription to BCP.